appreciate it, and every opportunity like this to engage in public debate is always welcome. Just before I start the slide, I hadn't planned that my laptop would be on. It's not an ad for Minecraft, it wasn't delivered. But just to develop briefly before I start Alicia's theme there about we can imagine robots built by robots with artificial intelligence, and we can imagine, well, we don't have to imagine, this is actually P67, the comet that's 2 billion miles from Earth, and we landed a small spacecraft on it, and we've sent signals back to the Earth, and we now know that we found a third type of water just in our solar system alone. It's currently about to circle around the back of the sun. Anyway, I'm a bit of a geek. But it is this idea of we can imagine and we can go to these 2 billion mile away comets. And then you say to somebody, yes, but what about fresh, clean drinking water for everyone on the planet? Oh, that's a bit much. So anyway, next time I'm doing it, I'll have a suitably uplifting protest photograph or something for my laptop. But there we go. TTIP, why are we being kept in the dark in the future of capitalism? I'm a member of TAC. It's the only group I've ever joined. It's got the wonderful name of the Association for the Taxation of Financial Transactions for the Aid of Citizens. Beware meeting me in the kitchen at parties. I will talk to you about tax. And then ATTAC is also, and I'm the representative from ATTAC to the TTIP Information Network, which we'll talk about briefly towards the end, which is a coalition of civil society groups here in Ireland. We're up to about 16. The National Women's Council of Ireland joined last week, and it's growing from there. TTIP.ie is the website where, in a rather lackluster manner, we upload stuff, but the Facebook page is very active and has material uploaded every day. If you want more information there, we can talk about that again. So the future of capitalism. Anyone ever heard of Ordo capitalism? Ordo liberalism, I should say. We got this period in the 1950s where we have superheroes of Thatcher like von Hayek, who was the inspirer of Milton Friedman. A little less sung hero of this period is Wilhelm Röpke. And he lamented the perceived hijacking of the state by the mob of vested interests. So this mob of vested interests, unfortunately, is you and me. The idea that the plebeian horde could dictate what the Department of Finance decides to do, who to tax and what the money is to be spent on, is obscene and immoral in the eyes of these people. They have a long lineage. He was looking in this paper from the social crisis of our time, looking at the Weimar Republic, in the run-up to the Second World War. He said the reason, I won't do the accents, the reason the state was weak was precisely because it was too heavily influenced by workers' movements. Yeah, and so just to sort of bring back in some of what Alice was saying, is like, for me, I'm kind of going like, okay, so let's just stand up and be adults in the room here. What is the purpose of democracy? If we, the people, cannot, in an adult and educated, literate fashion, read the various manifestos of the various political parties and look at what they have to say about the economy, and then go, well, this manner of regulating the economic interactions between us, between ourselves and companies, this particular set reflects the value system that I aspire to. And surely the entire purpose of democracy is quite specifically that the regulations and the laws of the land that govern and regulate the interactions between people, between companies, precisely dovetail with the value systems that we, as people and citizens in a democratic society, and the entire apparatus of TTIP, and the longitudinal line of intellectual thinking going back to Röpke, is the antithesis, is the opposite, is the complete opposite of that. He talked about protectionism, Keynesianism, the idea of having public services, that all of this sort of post-war stuff was a horror, and that what we did not just need international law, but we needed international economic law. And that's exactly what ISDS is. That's exactly what these super fantastic corporate courts are, where you elevate a private company to the status of a sovereign nation state, so that they can sue the government directly, outside the Irish court, outside the European courts, outside the American courts, and they sue them directly, as if they themselves were a government. He went on to say then in a book from 1950 that it is now advisable to make courts, more than in the past, organs of the economy, and to entrust to their decision tasks that were previously entrusted to the administrative authorities. So you can see this ISDS nonsense didn't just appear overnight. If you want to read up more on the lineage of that thinking, the best book to describe why we're in the crisis we're in was published by New York University Press in 1975. It was written by the Trilateral Commission, which is a private group of businesses from Japan, Europe and America, and it's called The Crisis of Democracy. And very quickly, within 2 or 3 pages of the introduction to the book, it says that vested interests have taken over the state, and that within 1 to 2 generations, global monopoly interest-based banking will be destroyed, and the resources of the earth will be shared between the people of the earth. And we know that this is a horror, because once you destroy competitiveness between people, human civilization will collapse, and we will revert to the Stone Age. This is the mindset of the bosses of the 500 largest corporations in the world that control 3/4 of all goods and services that are traded on the planet. It is not some freaky, weird, dystopian science fiction. This is in their book, published by the New York University Press. They go on then to quite clearly identify who these so-called vested interests are that are about to destroy interest-based monopoly global capitalism. Women, ethnic minorities, the disabled, the mentally ill, the poor and the very poor, Marxist academics, and trade unions, right? And these vested interests are the crisis of democracy. So it is no wonder, given that the Trilateral Commission is still in vogue, and we have our superheroes of industry, people like Peter Sutherland going to these events and whatnot. So I think it's important for us to calmly go, we're shocked, yes we are shocked. And the fact that you're shocked by ISDS and TTIP doesn't mean you're uneducated, doesn't mean you don't know what's going on. It means you're a decent, civilized human being that expects of others what you expect of yourself, and again, that reflects the value system, the vast majority of 99.9% of people in the world. Anyway, on to the nitty-gritty. It's a very long list. Why are we being kept in the dark? Well, this is why we're being kept in the dark. There was a slogan produced in 1997 by civil society groups that were campaigning against a very similar agreement to TTIP called the MAI. It was the Multilateral Agreement on Investment. And the Multilateral Agreement of Investment was very like TTIP, with its crazy corporate court and all these nonsense. And there was the idea that they could do it in private, really, really quickly. And then the French trade unions got a leaked copy, and within a month there was 2 million of them out in the street, and within 6 weeks the French Parliament said, no, we're not even going to discuss this is not going to happen. And I realised then, and I thought other people realised then, what capital was going to do was use its servants in the European Commission and the US Department of Trade to work out a way to have a multilateral agreement on investment that could trample on all the democratic gains of the last 200 years that wouldn't have to be voted on by democratic parliaments. So, on cue, along came the Amsterdam Treaty, and then the Nice Treaty, and the Lisbon Treaty, and all the waffle and the nonsense and the emotional hocus pocus that went around those. What it was all about for me was giving exclusive competence, in other words, total control, to the unelected corporate servants that are referred to as the European Commission, that they would have exclusive control over international trade agreements to do with manufactured goods and services, including health, and that's what they've got. So, first up, ISDS is anti-democratic. It means that you and I and small, medium-sized Irish businesses are not equal before the law. It is totally undemocratic. It allows foreign companies to have more rights than domestic companies. You can't take a corporation to court for destroying the air at the back of your house or destroying the river, and governments can't take corporations to the ISDS court. Only corporations can take cases, only governments can pay compensation. And if you don't pay the compensation that's required by an ISDS panel, why did they pay all this money? Why did they pay all? Because Standard & Poor's, Fitch's and Moody's, the rating agencies that took that took hocus pocus Ponzi schemes, put them in a magic box, gave it a shake, and now we have emails from the Senate hearings in America where we know that the traders who work for Fitch's and Standard & Poor were joking to each other how they just labelled, quote, a pile of crap as AAA. And then the Canadian Post Workers Trade Union Pension Fund buys it, and the Irish government buys it, and the Bank of Ireland buys it. And the reason they bought it was because it was labelled AAA. Why was it labelled AAA? Because Fitch's and Standard & Poor labelled it that. Why did they label it that? Because of deregulation. They were able to charge higher fees for labelling something as AAA, even though they knew that it was a Ponzi scheme, or what do they call it, the pyramid scheme. And then the whole global economy collapses in September 2008. And what happens? We still have journalists who take these people seriously. We're supposed to deferentially bow when Fitch's and Standard & Poor speak about the Irish credit rating. This is an abomination to logic. This is an antipathy to democracy. This is disgusting in civilized company. And let us embrace this logic, and let us embrace this rationalism. These people have no place in a civilized society. But if you don't pay your ISDS compensation for raising the minimum wage, Veolia was mentioned. They've got the 20-year contract to operate 6 or 8 sewage treatment plants around Ireland. They operate the Lewis in Dublin. They do similar activities in Egypt. We all know 2 or 3 years ago the people of Egypt went to the street. We want to get rid of this Mubarak, and one of the reasons there were so many people, 2 million, 2.5 million went off the street, was precisely because they wanted to raise the minimum wage. And now the nonsense government that they have there said, let's raise the minimum wage. And Veolia said, well, that sounds like an unnecessarily restrictive barrier to trade. That sounds like an overly burdensome and meddlesome barrier to trade. It's the language that's used in these things. We'll have a $1,300 million in compensation for all future unearned profits. The average cost of one of these cases is $4 million. So what it does is, any government trying to regulate, like New Zealand, whoa, let's put plain packaging on tobacco. No, let's just scrap that because Australia's up to its neck, being sued by Philip Morris in one of these crazy corporate courts for bringing in plain packaging. So what it does is, any government trying to regulate, like New Zealand, whoa, let's put plain packaging on tobacco. No, let's just scrap that because Australia's up to its neck, being sued by Philip Morris in one of these crazy corporate courts for bringing in plain packaging. And so it has what's called a chilling effect. You get some decent skins in the government to try to do something to help the people, protect their economy, boost workers' rights, share the burden of debt, etc. And then they don't, because they're afraid of being dragged through the mire of one of these abominable arbitrations outside the normal legal system. Even if they win, best case scenario, it only costs them $4 million and a lot of grief. And then all the business presses are writing about this crazy left-wing government who's stomping over investors' rights, and the case hasn't even started. So it's not in your interest to try to introduce regulations once your country is grabbed by the neck in one of these things. So I want to talk about the myth of economic growth, how it tramples on workers' rights, how it destroys safety and food, how it will mean it's impossible to enact climate change, how you won't be able to know what kind of muck you're eating in processed food, and it goes on and on and on. We probably won't have time to get all through it. So the big one then is investor state dispute settlement, and in the Q&A I might talk a little bit about the nonsensical supposed better ISDS that was voted for in the European Parliament last Wednesday. Last Wednesday in the European Parliament there was a totally non-binding resolution, not legally binding resolution, trying to find out whether or not the members of the European Parliament were in favour of TTIP and in favour of this ISDS. They voted for this bizarre, better ISDS, which makes no logical sense at all and is an insult to common intelligence. Anyway, this is what the standard ISDS is. It's already written in stone into the EU-Canada trade deal. It cannot be changed. We'll see if that ever comes to the Parliament. It's already written in stone in the EU-Singapore agreement. Singapore is a very little place. Canada doesn't frighten us, so this is why it's not in the public debate. The reason we're able to talk about ISDS in the public debate is because we are all afraid of America, and with good reason. Gus van Harten is probably the world's leading critical thinker on ISDS from an academic perspective. It allows companies, as I say, to sue countries, but it doesn't allow governments to sue. Doesn't allow governments to sue corporations. He said is that it basically what you're doing is you're delegating a central job of the state, which is to run the court system, and you're privatizing that out to a foreign entity, out to an entity outside. So it challenges the cherished principles of democracy, of equality before the law. So you go to the law, you can't take a case in ISDS because you're a person. Irish companies can't take a case against the Irish government because they're Irish, only American companies will. American companies won't be able to sue the American government, only European companies will be able to sue the American government. So you have to be foreign corporation. There's two things, not a human, not a domestic company. And the compromise deal the Parliament voted on is talking about an appeals body which would consist of yet more arbitrators. So instead of us all being equal before, and as well, this idea of the separation of powers, this wonderful idea developed in the 1700s, 1800s, of you have judiciary, you have the Parliament, you have the government ministers, and you have the law and the constitution. And then between the law and citizens' right to take cases against the government in the courts, the government ministers' jobs to write laws that reflect the manifesto that they were elected on, and the Parliament's duty to keep an eye on the ministers to make sure they don't run away with themselves, and then finally the courts to protect the people from governments that might run away with themselves. And that whole system is just blown out of the water. So the old 1984 slogan slightly changed. When companies go to the court, even though a corporation cannot breathe, eat, feel, smell, or touch, it is still treated the same as you and me in front of court. So a corporation is treated as a legal entity, even though it doesn't do morals or ethics or feelings. It's a legal entity. And so what we're saying with ISDS does is that all legal entities are equal, but some are more equal than others. I'll give you 2 or 3 small examples. You see what happened at the end of history. Oh, it wasn't the end of history, surprise, surprise. When the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Empire collapsed, in the early 90s, in their rush for freedom / corporate capitalism, the poor old unfortunate Eastern Bloc countries, most of which some of which ended up joining the Union in 2004, they just went, oh, freedom, I'll sign anything. So they signed all these nonsensical, anti-democratic investor-state dispute settlement agreements with the USA, and one of those unfortunate countries was the Czech Republic. Ralph Lauder, multi-billionaire cosmetics manufacturer, bought a television station for a very small, less than 10 million. There was a small change in the regulation of commercial TV to do with the renewal of the license, as to whether they were serving a public function, whether they had news. He said, whoa, you're after changing some of the tiny criteria involved in my private enterprise. So what he did was, he used a holding corporation that he owns privately that's based in Holland, using it to sue through the German courts, using a Swedish, Czech ISDS trade agreement. Right? And the courts there go like, well, we're not allowed to take in human rights or democratic accountability or the role of the media democratic society or the constitution or the law. The only thing we're allowed to take into consideration is, let's have a look here. Oh yes, is that law, is that regulation an unnecessarily or overly burdensome or meddlesome barrier to trade? Hey, I've been working as a corporate lawyer for 20 years. Of course it is. And he was awarded $353 million. Why did the Czech government, only 10 years out of the Soviet Empire, why did they pay it? Because if they didn't, their entire economy would have collapsed. Because Fitch's and Standard & Poor would have switched their credit rating from an A or a AA to a CCC, in which case the only money they will be able to borrow in the international stock market will be a ridiculous 20 and 22, 25%. Collapsing their economy. It's a nexus of ideology. It's a nexus of brutality, this machine. If that was 2012 in America, that would have been $131,000 million. That's how much, this is just one example of hundreds of court cases around the world that governments, so like $353 million to Czech Republic in 2001 was the equivalent of $131 billion to America. It's ridiculous money. Ecuador then, depressing video footage you could see of the crude oil seeping into the Amazon forest. Children with awful diseases, deformed births, utterly infertile land, cancer, destruction of villages and towns, gas and oil flares in the middle of a street out of the blue. Country's been trashed. The Ecuadorian Supreme Court said, $19,000 million compensation, please. And Chevron went, I don't think so, mate. And looked up and said that as a result of the encouragement and reciprocal protection of investment agreement that Ecuador signed with America, if you go back and check the Ecuadorian papers, there was a brief mention of it in the business section. The same as there's only a brief mention in the business section these days about TTIP. And we're supposed to be a sophisticated democratic society. Anyway, so that's that. The money's not being paid. Just, I gave the example of Viola, and to go on with poor old El Salvador, Oceanic Gold, the current government were elected, and one of their main top 10 things was, we will not allow gold mining at the last remaining reservoir of fresh drinking water in our country. There's a potential gold mine right beside it and underneath this lake, and they were elected to leave it there. Oceanic Gold put in a very poorly worded application to drill for gold. The government said not only is it a poor application, and we were elected to not allow you to do this. You didn't even fill in an environmental impact statement. No, in other words, it's not right for us. They're being sued at an ISDS for all future unearned income as a result of the interference of the private business in a private business. And again, this isn't weird, it's just weird to us because, well, we believe in the idea that the laws and regulations of the land should reflect the value system of the people, and that we grew up with the idea that actually that's the purpose of democracy. If you go and look at what the Trilateral Commission is saying about the vested interests in their Crisis of Democracy book from 1975, if you look at what Rupke and Van Heyen were saying in the 1950s, this idea has come from somewhere. And it's come from the idea that democracy is the devil. Corporate power. It is the means through which the rich feel threatened, undermined, attacked, picked on. You see the likes of Dennis O'Brien. Oh, poor me! It's all picking on me. Yeah, poor me. You're like hitting them on the side of the head with a 20-pound trap. Like, what planet have you just arrived off? But the rich are not like us. That's why they're called. You know what I mean? I mean, they're flesh and blood human beings, but the idea that when we're Apple, we shouldn't pay tax. I'm Dennis O'Brien, I shouldn't pay tax. Dennis O'Brien's children go to school in Raglan, in Dublin. Both of them. Anyway, listen, sorry. Dennis O'Brien, Peter Sutherland, I could give 2 hour lectures on that. But anyway, you get the idea. Now, here's a really lengthy quote that's worth it. This guy worked as an arbitrator for years, and he said this, Fernandez Ernesto. When I wake up at night and think about arbitration, it never ceases to amaze me that sovereign states have agreed to investment arbitration at all. 3 private individuals are entrusted with the power to review, without any restrictions or appeal procedure, all actions of the government, all decisions of the courts, and all laws and regulations emanating from Parliament. Politicians have never given such authority to a national court, and no state has given an international court nearly so much power. It has to be stopped and put in the dustbin of history. The enlightening question. All right, lads, Fine Gael, absolute one of the political parties most determined to push this ISDS across the line. We're taking a very personal interest, says Fine Gael, in this. Not only that, but when the new European Commission came into power last October, November, our Minister for Trade, Richard Bruton, was one of only 14 ministers for trade to sign a letter and send it to Malmström, the trade commissioner, and the new head of the commission, saying, we gave you a mandate in July 2013 to implement the ISDS corporate court. Don't be listening to these whingers in the parliament. It is your job to do the bidding of the Council of 28 Trade Ministers. We gave you the mandate, drive it home. And that's Richard Brune, taking a very personal interest. It's a small town. You're going to meet Fine Gael people, personally, socially, families. Well, maybe not, but whatever. Out and about. I'm just going like, where are you going with this? Did you debate it in the Common? Does your local TD know? Do the Fine Gael city councillors know? Was it ever discussed at a common level? Did they even know that the 28 Ministers of Trade gave the mandate to the European Commission to drive this home in July 2013? See, there's no evidence of European and American judges riding roughshod over the interests of capitalist investors. I say to them sometimes, I had a debate with the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ireland. I said, where are the 200 cases? Okay, I'll make it easy. Give me the 5 or 20 cases where American investors in Europe and European investors in America had their money expropriated, where their rights were trampled all over. They don't exist. So intellectually, their argument is dead. There is no evidence that Europe or America need these courts, right? The other one then is that if there's no evidence, I would say that it's actually in the absence of any evidence, that what we're talking about is companies want to be able to avoid jurisprudence, which is the evidence of previous court cases that have gone in the past, and ignore the Constitution. And we know this is a fact, because IBEX boys in Europe, the big corporate lobby group here in Ireland, who's a member, who's not a member, are you allowed to see the list? No, you're not. But when they issue a press release, you give a damn sure it's getting on the front page of the Irish Times and the 6 o'clock news, folks. No doubt about that. So IBEX is part of a European organisation called Business Europe, which is the biggest lobby group in Europe. It's not just the 28 members, it's actually 35 countries that they lobby on behalf of the equivalent of IBEC for. When you go to their website, they've got a handy 12-page document, why TTIP matters for European business. And they say we need ISDS because in the future, a European investor may be doing business in America, they may feel that a law or regulation interferes with their profits, and because TTIP will not be transposed into US law, and because the US courts will not recognise the text of TTIP, and because, just what he says, what it says is, because American judges will rely on US law and the US Constitution, the investor may not get remedy and will be forced to go to ISDS. I believe in the American people's right to have judges that use their constitution to protect their people. I believe in that. And I also believe in our European right to do that as well. So the idea that our supposed representatives of the European Commission are doing the bidding of Business Europe over there with our brothers and sisters in America trying to do down their laws and their constitution makes us one global people. Because this isn't just our Europe and America. It's Europe and Canada, Europe and Singapore. And it goes on and on. There are many of these agreements. TTIP is just one of them that's going on in the world. Why not just go to court? What is it? And the other thing then is, they have no evidence that it has happened before. And number two then, so you're going to have a better ISDS. Well, give us 10 or 20 examples of the kind of court cases that will happen. Silence. Well, it's just to set a gold standard. Blah, 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 blah. Well, look, you've no evidence. You can't envisage what it's going to happen. So, listen, allow me to use my scepticism, which is opinion based on evidence of previous behaviour, publicly made statements, and say that obviously it's to overturn environmental laws, workers' rights, and public accountability. Colin Brown made a useful contribution to an EU Affairs Committee meeting there a few weeks back. He is over in Brussels working for the Department of Trade in the European Commission. He's a specialist in dispute settlement. And when asked by the Cahorlock of the Oireachtas Committee, why do we need ISDS? This is what he said. It's a bit long, but anyway. What he said was, if a European investor or an Irish investor has a problem in the US, it cannot turn to the local court or the US federal court and ask for the application of the TTIP agreement. This is important because there are certain rules of non-discrimination which would be included in the TTIP agreement for investment protection part that will not necessarily be found in US law. So the agreement is to overrule and override US law, the right of US citizens to make law, and the right to defend our constitution. And it's exactly the same for us. This is exactly what US corporations are going to do to us. And this is what the Commission wants to do to the Americans, and it's exactly the same. Therefore, the investor will be left with no defence and no means to enforce the agreement because it's not enforceable in US domestic law. The fact that the US has a highly developed legal system, just as is the case, this is my favourite bit, is frankly not a guarantee that either country respects international law. So these people go around saying Europe and America don't respect international law. Oh yes, they do. What they don't respect is this idea of international economic law, which is exactly what your man Rupke was talking about when he started the lecture back in the 1940s. The European Commission commissioned a study from a reputable research institute based in London, the CEP, or the Centre for Economic Policy Research. In the 48-page document, it quite clearly says economic growth will be between 0.03 and 0.054% per annum. 0.05 is 1/20th of 1%. That's the economic. Remember the credit tiger? Sorry, I find great difficulty calling it the Celtic tiger. So my mum reckons there was nothing Celtic about it, and that it was all based on credit. So she makes me call it the credit tiger. But anyway, so I call it the credit tiger. Do you remember we were like, woo, biggest economic growth, 5%, 7%, 4%, woohoo, great, yes. 1/20th of 1%, what? But you want to trash the right to improve workers' rights and protect the environment and regulate the stock market. You want to trash all that for 1/20th of 1%, and you're saying that's a best case scenario. How do you get around that? You see, that's not a problem for the corporate representatives in the EU Commission and Fine Gael. That's a perception management issue, right? So the perception management crew got on board, wrote a little executive summary, and randomly picked a figure 10 to represent 10 years, multiplied it by 0.05, and got 0.5, right? If you type into the internet, Irish Independent, Examiner, Times, TTIP, guarantee you, every one of those articles says it's 0.5% economic growth. Some of them even say it's 2, and some of them even say it's 5. Sure, if you multiply 0.05 by 10 to get 0.5, I heard something about 10 years, sure, it's probably 5%. Sean Kelly, it's good around saying it's 2.5%. Sean, you're on your own now. Nobody's even saying that, not even the Commission. Now, I used to have this thing, should some of them guys, they might be on the side of species eradication and clearing the planet of humans to help some kind of toxic gloop-friendly creature to survive and destroy democracy. But at least they know what's going on, you know. But sadly not. And so here's a little video of Karl de Gucht. Now, he's the, where is it? He's the, stop. Go away. Anyway, so basically, our man in Europe, and it's not our man in Europe, I don't know why I said that, that's not it either. Technical problems. Here he is here. Now, he is the, I can feel it's going to be great. Now, so he is the EU Commissioner for Trade for the 5 years up to last November. You kind of go, well, at least he knows what's going on. At least he knows his, you know, tractors from his ice cream, from his 5%, from his 2%, and he knows what's going on. He might be a devious divil, but here we go. This is him in an interview with a German, what do you call it, television show. No. Anyway, so he goes on like this. He goes on like this. Let me see. This is him going. Your man says to him, but it's 0.05. Now, this is from the CEPR study. I have it here if you'd like to see it. But it's 0.5. No, it's 0.05. Oh. so can we stop there's a 20-minute version, can we stop the interview? And so 5 minutes later he comes in, and what he says is, this may be so, but we're going to have serious economic growth as a result of getting rid of regulations. And you kind of go, okay, so you're our representative at these trade talks, and you read the executive 10-page summary of the report that you're basing. You want me to believe that TTIP is good because you have this report and you didn't even read it. Do you know? And so this is an important aspect. You see, the journalists as well, they might, you know, I mean, they could be decent people. They might even have a respect for democracy. But if they're seeing in the press release from, you know, the American Chamber of Commerce and IBEC and Finnegan and the European Commission, and that's one of the big problems that we have communicating these issues. So at the best case scenario, and so what that's about is getting rid of all the regulations. So imagine the increase in profits if all this red tape like health and safety regulations is got rid of, and then you add all that up, and you still only get 120 to 1% per year. So that's not nice. The next one then is this business of €545 per family. Kind of like, really? That works out at $262 per person per week. You might get a coffee for it. And so this is the way they worked that out, right? This isn't even in the CIFR study, it's just put in. So they went around, the Commission looked at various sectors of European industry, randomly selected representatives of those industries, randomly selected health and safety and environmental regulations that interfere with the business, and went to them and said, if these regulations were got rid of, would it be good for you? Yeah. How much better would it be? Oh, great. And they went around, added all that up, multiplied it by the size of the European economy, then they worked out how much more better off Europe would be, then they divided by the number of people that live in Europe, and then they multiplied that by 4, because everyone knows there's 4 people in every family, and they came up with 545. Okay? These are the people that are in charge of this trade agreement. And they say with a straight face. It's standard. Now, the jobs. How many economists does it take to change a light bulb? None. Because if the light bulb was broken, the market would have fixed it. Right? This is literally where these people live. You could be in a room full of neoliberalists who wouldn't even find it funny. Now, computable general equilibrium. See, I said it. CEG. It is a model for economists to pour in statistics and figures to work out what is the impact of an international trade agreement, free trade agreement, going to be on the economy. It was invented a couple of decades ago, and when it was, they said, you wouldn't want to be basing government public policy on this model. This is for economists by economists, and it's to be kept inside a college or maybe a department of trade, but it shouldn't see the light of day, because it makes no sense in the real world. Because, you know, we're just messing around with figures here, folks. Well, them were the days. Thatcher won. No, Reagan won, Cole won, neoliberalism won, humanity nil, and here we are, and it's now used as a model. So, what does it do? This model says that workers' rights regulation, that health equality thing, that food quality standards, all of these are costs. If they were gone, the economy would grow. Okay? So all costs to a business are calculated, a removal of costs are calculated. This is the model, and so again, pounding home the idea that it's intellectually dead in the water, and this entire apparatus of this notion of this version of free trade, is that there's a mountain of evidence to show that high levels of regulation in terms of workers' safety, workers' rights, environmental protection, agricultural safeguards, etc., and financial regulation, boosts economic growth, improves living standards and longevity, boosts education, productivity of workers, and the productivity of the economy, and leads to higher return on investment. So that's the logic, folks. That's the logic. All the evidence shows, you know yourself. Do you know what I mean? If you're going to invest money, you'd invest it in Sweden or Germany or Ireland rather than, Thailand or Namibia or somewhere that's less fortunate and less democratic. And so we know intuitively that regulation is good for humanity and good for society and therefore good for the economy. But this isn't what it's about. Because these people know that the threat to the maintenance of grotesque inequality, the maintenance of the brutality of homelessness and absence of mental health services for people, forcing everyone to charge, they pay for water, instability, insecurity, poverty wages, mental health difficulties. This is the way to maintain and exacerbate the gap between the rich and poor and ensure that the rich stay on top. As far as they're concerned, it is a war. And whether you like it or not, it is a war. The class war is on, and our side is losing. Oh, that sounds like class war politics. I didn't start the war, I'm here to end it. Okay? And so, this is one of the things that I find most galling. That even at an intellectual level, you could say, ooh, it's a bit brutal, there might be a bit more cancer, could be a bit more mental health difficulties as a result of a reduction in workers' rights, but at least it makes sense. It doesn't make sense on any level, except the imposition of a brutal neoliberalism, all against all, absolute competition, individualism, the instruction of the environment, and the rollback of democratic gains of the last 200 years. Now, even the study for the corporation itself predicts that 0.6% of EU jobs will be displaced. They have already built a fund to fund workers who will lose their jobs as a result. Now, another beautiful thing about computable general equilibrium is that it assumes at the start of the analysis 100% employment. So it starts from the premise that everybody who could have a job does have a job. And it assumes that, oh right, well as a result of TTIP there will be still jobs, lots. So a working class man or woman working in a steel factory in France can just pop off overnight, the next day arrive in Romania and become a software engineer. Because there's absolutely no financial cost involved in retraining, there's no financial cost involved in moving your family, everybody has the money to set up shop in a new country overnight. And, well, that's computable general equilibrium. So when Finnegan come out and say, to be honest, I've just stopped mentioning Labour in the same we don't mention the Progressive Democrats anymore. There's some people look at it in history, I think, you know. And good riddance. Anyway, so this is a nonsense. And again, you're going to go, guys, this you know what I mean? I'm an old school Enlightenment man. The idea in the 1700s, let's base our views and opinions of our leaders and corporations on the evidence. Let's have evidence-based decision-making by government. Great, okay, bring it on. Ooh, it's a bit brutal, but no, it doesn't work. It's illogical, irrational, and it's back to the many jokes about the economists. The disruption of human and social disruption isn't included. It is automatically assumed that people who lose jobs in one area of the economy will gain jobs in another. So one of the things, for example, is there's 1,328 chemicals that are banned from use in cosmetics in Europe. In America there's 11, right? Yeah. So, if we have regulatory recognition, which is what they want, right? So if it's good enough to be sold in America, it's good enough to be sold in Europe, and it's an unnecessarily restrictive barrier to trade if you try and test that product. Okay? So what's going to happen to all the cosmetic manufacturers in Europe? They're going to close their factories, they're going to go to America, and they're going to use these grotesque chemicals, yeah, in their manufacture of the product. We'll lose the jobs, they'll gain the jobs, and then we'll be forced to have unregulated, grotesque chemicals. I mean, this is exactly what happened. It's not like this is the first one ever. You have the North American Free Trade Agreement from 1994. You talk to American farmers. You talk to small American and medium-sized businesses in small-town America. They know all about NAFTA. They know all about free trade. I was standing on Molesworth Street there a few weeks ago at the European Parliament, and this bunch of Americans, there was like, what is this? Oh, that TTIP, they don't want that free trade, oh, it ruined our town. And just kept on walking, these were like regular tourists just walking down the road. And so what happened there was, because Mexico had much lower workers' rights, lower workers' safety, lower environmental standards, if you were involved in, you know, packaging chicken, you just shut your shop in America and went down to Mexico, got all the toxic gloop you wanted, no workers' rights, low wages, bang, bang, chicken goes. The chicken looks the same on the shelf in Detroit as it did when it was made in America, but it's got a lot more toxic gloop in it and the blood of many workers in it, you know? And so that's one of the effect that it's going to happen. Plus, like, what do you call it? Just over two and a half years ago now, France banned fracking. Okay, so we drilled down between 5 and 10 kilometres under the earth, and then you explode the ground and you pump arsenic and a shed load of other chemicals at high pressure under the water, smash the rock, suck up the gas, and then the gas filters up into the water under the ground and bubbles up in your lakes and comes out as gas in your tap, which you can light. That kind of fracking. The French banned it. American company that wants to frack in France took the French government to the French Constitutional Court, and the French Constitutional Court said, you better be right. The French government has every right to use the Constitution to protect the environment and its people. We don't want fracking, and that's the end of it. They're on the starting block, ready to go. The minute TTIP comes in, and the first country in Europe is going to be sued for fracking is France, just to give us all a bloody nose. And they're on record. This is the plan. I mean, the idea of the mob interfering in the private business of a private business is not, they just think it's obscene. Now, jobs then, looking at Jerin Capaldo in Tufts University in America. He didn't use the computable general equilibrium model, he used the United Nations trade impact model, which takes into account human beings. And he has, you know, I mean, it's endless pages of Excel sheets and figures and whatnot. But he's predicted 600,000 job losses in the EU, and that average Northern European workers' wages will drop by almost 5,000, between 4 and 5. Which you can see why the large corporations are into this, if it's going to do this to workers' wages. Now, workers' rights are an unnecessarily restrictive barrier to trade. Why do you need them gloves? Why can't you mix them chemicals? What do you need a breeding apparatus for? It's costing me a fortune. I didn't come here to spend money on. I was like, hang on. So, in free trade agreements like this, all laws and regulations must be least meddlesome. And that's the term that's used. And so, if it's, sorry, that should actually say, it shouldn't say no US minimum. There is a US minimum wage, I think it's $6.80 an hour. But the point is, it's very, very low. And the point is that there's a movement in America now to increase to $15 an hour. And it's gaining traction. Actually, the only place in the Western world where unions are winning victories is in the USA. We can talk about that later if you want. But what the ISDS court does is it interprets the text of the trade agreement. And the trade agreement has these huge, vague, ill-defined phrases such as regulations shall be justifiable and made in the public interest. They should be least burdensome. Fairness is the doctrine, and da-da-da-da. You kind of go, these words mean nothing unless it says nothing to do with workers' rights can ever be used in an ISDS case. Nothing to do with environmental regulation can ever... It doesn't say that, it won't say that, there's no intention of it to say that, because that would defeat the purpose of the entire trade deal in the first place. And we talked about the Veolia case in Egypt. There's no holidays in America. Do you know? You're a happy little worker, and patting the head, oh, I got 2 days off work. I'm great, and my boss is really nice. There's no law that your employer has to give you any holidays in America. Plenty of American businesses operating here in Ireland. You want what? You want 20 days off? Sounds like a meddlesome, burdensome, overly restrictive barrier to trade to me. No, you're not getting 20 days off, you can have 2. And so in the States, and so the idea is harmonization of regulations. Isn't it ridiculous that you try to do business in America and you've got different rules and regulations? Isn't it different? And this is what, if you read the rhetoric of the corporate lobbying groups and the Commission and the Department of Trade, US Department of Trade, this is what they're talking about. Regulatory harmonization, regulatory recognition. So let's talk about regulatory recognition, regulatory harmonization. We're talking about my 20 days holidays a year. I don't want to harmonise with zero. Eh? Do we really believe, in good conscience, that the Americans are coming to the table going, oh, we haven't thought, I think it's a great idea. Let's harmonise, let's increase workers' rights in America. I think everyone in America should, oh, brilliant, they'll be delighted with this. And the US Department of Trade going home, sending out a press release, dear trade unions, you'll be delighted to hear the Europeans convinced us to have 20 days holidays a year. Isn't it great? Oh, and we're going to raise the minimum wage to the average in Europe as well. Okay, you know, I mean, if any of us believe that that's going to happen, okay, right, maybe I should go on a little bit longer. But you know, I think common sense dictates that that's not what's not going to happen. We know the capital moves to where pay and workers' rights are the lowest. Pay and workers' rights lower in America. You get regulatory recognition. Anything with a lower level of regulation, whether it's meat processing or cosmetics manufacturing or builder suppliers, whatever it is, production will move over there and we lose our jobs. And in the end, everybody loses out. Now, here's an example of another one about health and safety, is the precautionary principle. Now, the precautionary principle does what it says. It was brought into law in the European Union a good few years ago, and the idea is that, oh, that's a new chemical, we don't know what it does, we better proceed with caution. Let's have a look at it for 2 years, see if cancer goes up or down, see if it affects wildlife. If it does, we'll ban it. Oh, there's 2 scientists over here who used to work in, corporations, but they're now independent, and they say it doesn't cause cancer. Well, good for them. Isn't it nice to have a variety of opinion? The overwhelming body of evidence would tend to show, and most scientists would agree, on precaution, we're going to ban that chemical. That's the system the European Union uses. And it's one of those things that you can see that, like, you know, if your main thing was environmentalism, yeah, sorry, as opposed to being green, you know, did you go like, Europe is bad on some things, but geez, they're great on things, you're great in the environment. You go, okay, fair enough. In America, they use a completely different system. It's called the scientific method. It sounds brilliant. And what it is that if the government wants to regulate or ban a chemical, the government has to prove to a judge that there isn't one scientist anywhere in the world who disagrees with them. And you must have overwhelming, absolute, 100% guaranteed scientific proof that that chemical causes cancer or is an endocrine disruptor. Get it going? Science isn't supposed to be like that. There's always going to be a few naysayers, but the overwhelming body of evidence says this. Overwhelming body of evidence says chemical is an endocrine disruptor or causes cancer. That's okay, because we found 25 scientists who disagree. All right, there'll be no regulation of that chemical. That's a scientific method. That's what's used in America. We use the precautionary principle. The idea is to harmonise this system. Okay, so one that takes on risk and common sense, and one that is based in, well, corporations regulating themselves. They are not compatible. So, neonicotinoids is a family of pesticides that was brought out 10 to 12 years ago. What ended up happening was that there's been an 80% reduction in the supply in bees. Sorry, I'm going to have to get my cable. In the supply in the bees, and so we had this massive what they call a colony collapse disorder. So colony collapse disorder is endless millions of bees dying and nobody knowing why they're dying. 80% of the food that human beings need, that's us, is pollinated by bees. If the death rate continues, right, the only way that we can eat is to have patented, genetically modified seeds that don't need bees. And you pay the, you know, as far as, okay, genetically modified food might be physically safe for our bodies. I don't know, you know, I'm not a scientist. But my problem is that the seed is patented. And it will only grow if a certain brand of herbicide and pesticide is used. and that's owned by the people who own the patent to the seed. You can't collect your seed. And if the seed goes across the field with the birds and the bees helping out and grows on another farmer's field, then the corporation expropriates that farmer's crop. And, if and because they use intellectual property law, right, everywhere except Europe does this, everywhere in the world except Europe, is that it's not that you have to pay them back compensation for stealing their intellectual property, it's that you have to pay intellectual property law fines. So the fine is larger than the value of your farm, so you sell your farm and they give you a compromise deal of just give us the farm and we call it quits on the rest of the compensation. And that's one of the things that's wiping out farmers around the world, and it's one of the reasons why neonicotinoids are a key battle in the struggle for human survival. I know that sounds incredibly emotional and whatnot, the struggle for human survival, but that is what we're, the position that we're at. And, well, you got 28 minutes there. Okay. So basically, if you look at what CropLife America is saying, CropLife America is the largest corporate lobby group for the chemical industry and the GM industry, and they say very, 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 very clearly that that the precautionary principle has to go, and that it's their main purpose in the TTIP negotiations. The European Commission is like, precautionary principle, it's a bit unscientific in places. It's a bit unscientific in places, yeah, you know, it might be one of the things that has to go. Since the European Union used the precautionary principle to ban neonicotinoids 2 years ago, and our bee population is coming back up. So we know that our scientific method of the precautionary principle is sound, and we know that one of the chief objectives of the US Trade Department is explicitly to completely remove the precautionary principle. Okay, in terms of health and safety. Okay, and just to go through briefly the rest of the stuff then. Yeah, I said that. Climate change, you can imagine, right, that's it. We've got a progressive government now. Over the next 10 years, in 10 years' time, nobody will be using oil and gas. It's an absolute stupid idea. It destroys the planet and endangers the survival of our entire planet. And so we're going to introduce a series of tax measures and grants and incentives. And the tax on petrol and gas and diesel is going to go from, you know, whatever it is, 10 or 20%, up to 5,000%. So that it's going to be completely useless. And we're going to use geothermal and solar and wind and wave and wind power. And we're going to transform our economies and societies to get rid of fossil fuels, because we would like to save the planet. That's the end of that. Well, every single company that loses money as a result of refusing to participate in this movement of humanity will be able to sue in the ISDS. That it was grown by genetically modified food, by underpaid, poorly workers in a poor environment, and we won't know. Now the other one is this negative list. And so the negative list is that if there's anything in your society that isn't on this list, it's up for privatization. They won't show us the negative list. So we can only assume that health, education, government procurement and everything else is on that list. There's the 1,328 chemicals that we ban, right? And the 11 that the Americans ban. Regulatory Cooperation Council is very, I mean, they're not radicals. The European Consumer Group, BEUC, they have a great blog on TTIP. They call the Regulatory Cooperation a surreal institutionalization of lobbying. They want to write it into an international law under TTIP, that before the European Union or the American government begin to even think about having a regulation of a chemical, and we have a lot of work to do on that, that they have a Regulatory Cooperation Council, and that involves stakeholders like Bayer and Syngenta and Monsanto and all the chemical corporations. And if they introduce a regulation to do with anything, they have to justify themselves. And if the justification isn't satisfying to the stakeholders, they call the chemical corporations, you know, the thing has to be scrapped. And so regulatory cooperation councils is nearly as dangerous as ISDS itself. Anyone remember SOPA and PPAP? American legislation to do with the internet. At the minute, every internet service provider has to allow you to access every website in the world. They can't, like Vodafone can't say, oh, there's a website here that specialises in showing how Vodafone doesn't pay tax. We'd like to ban that from our service. At the minute it's illegal for them to do that. TTIP will allow them to embrace their entrepreneurial spirit and say what goes down their tubes. They will also be able to introduce fees for basic net packages, so that if you want your website to have colour and photographs and video, you have to pay maybe $100,000 to $200,000. And so the idea of citizens using the internet to campaign to create a better world will be dead in the water and finished outright. April last year, the European Parliament voted watertight. Yeah, absolutely, we're keeping net neutrality. They voted, the committee that deals with it voted last Monday week to go through the same process again. Earlier this year, America voted to keep net neutrality again, but they're going to keep coming back, and they're going to keep coming back. But once it's at national level or European level, you can roll it back. But once it goes into an international trade agreement, if you try to change it, you're talking about international economic war. And this is where they want to go with this. That they get into a situation where if you want to improve or increase or any regulation or renationalise the service, that they're looking at the table across the Americans and going, do you really want to bring down the entire world economy and go back to 1929 and have an absolute trade war? Because that's where we're going with this, and that's what they want to do, and that's why it's so health and services absolutely gone. Resistance is fertile, everybody. We're going to win this. We're going to win this for the same reason that we have a republic, that we have democracy, that women and men in law anyway are supposed to be treated equally. And all the things that sounded utopian and wild 100 or 200 years ago that we've managed to achieve. It is with these, so it's actually 1.3 million. There's this self-organised European citizens petition is now at 2.3 million. 2,300,000. So stop TTIP.eu, get on there, .org, and sign it. Notwithstanding political parties, but trade unions, people might know, are absolutely key to the victory being there. We now have international days of action against these trade agreements. There was one last October, there was one in March as well. We had a good thing up in Dublin. I know there was something in Cork too. As I say, ATTAC are part of the Irish TTIP Information Network. We decided to call it the TTIP Information Network rather than Smash Capitalism Down, this sort of thing. Because we do believe that there are cheese manufacturers and carpenters out there running businesses going like, oh, geez, I don't want that stuff. And remember, small and medium-sized businesses are going to be wiped out of the water with this because they can't sue in a so, you know, high-quality food and produce manufacturers here in Europe that have good wages and good working conditions and good quality products and good quality food will be wiped out of the water by cheap, nasty US imports when this comes in. So we've got Eurotalk, the Association of European Chefs, Troker, Unite, Friends of the Art, National Women's Council, Deaf and Developed Coalition, TTIP.ie, and a very busy Facebook page. We're now on our 5th multi-sectoral, multi-level, European-wide, so huge European civil society networks like the Seattle to Brussels Network, Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, European Attack Network, the European Digital Rights Initiative, etc., 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 doing fantastic work, linking hundreds of thousands of activists all across Europe. If we'd had that TTIP ISDS vote this time last year, it would have walked in. Instead of that, they ended up having to have this mealy-mouthed, completely impractical and unworkable mishmash of an ISDS, and apologising for it. So loads and loads of civil society groups. The next day of action is Saturday, the 10th of October. So looking forward to that. In summary, TTIP and the ISDS, it destroys democracy, privileges corporations, attacks workers' rights, ensures climate change, blocks the developing world from developing, privatises public service, destroys the internet. But don't worry, people's power will defeat it. Thank you.